The most expensive financial mistake I see people make is not a bad stock pick. It is not buying at the top. It is not failing to predict a recession. It is much more ordinary than that. It is spending years using the wrong scoreboard. Once a person uses the wrong scoreboard, almost every decision that follows begins to bend in the wrong direction. He earns, but he does not feel ahead. He saves, but he does not feel proud. He invests, but he still feels behind. He works harder, buys more, upgrades his life, and somehow becomes more fragile while telling himself he is progressing. That is a terrible bargain. I have spent most of my life thinking about money in practical terms, not as theater, not as a social contest, as a tool. A very powerful tool, yes, but still a tool. And tools should be judged by what they do. Do they give you room? Do they give you peace? Do they give you optionality? Do they let you think more clearly, act more patiently, and live more on your own terms? Or do they simply help you look successful to people who are not going to fund your future when the bill comes due? That is the dividing line. A surprising number of people spend the best working years of their lives playing a game they can never really win. I call it the visible game. The visible game is built from comparison. It lives in neighborhoods, social feeds, office conversations, family pressure, and the quiet humiliation people feel when they think their life does not photograph well enough. In the visible game, a car is not transportation. It is a statement. A house is not shelter. It is ranking. A vacation is not rest. It is evidence. A brand is not quality. It is social shorthand. The visible game is expensive because it teaches people to buy symbols before they own security. That is how perfectly intelligent adults trap themselves. They buy proof before they build protection, and proof is hungry. Once you start feeding it, it never tells you that you are done. There is always a larger home. There is always a newer car. There is always someone with a more polished life, a more expensive hobby, a more flattering version of success. Comparison creates an appetite that cannot be satisfied by consumption, because the appetite is not really about the thing being purchased. It is about status. And status is one of the least financially rewarding things a person can chase, because its value depends on what other people can see and how other people rank it. That means your emotional peace is no longer under your control. It is outsourced to the crowd. I have never thought that was a wise arrangement. The game worth playing is much quieter. It is the hidden game. The hidden game is built from the things nobody claps for in real time. Cash reserves, low fixed costs, a rising ownership stake in productive assets, an emergency fund that lets you breathe, a retirement account that is being fed steadily whether anyone notices or not, a person who can say no because he is not one bad month away from trouble. The hidden game does not photograph especially well. That is one reason it is so powerful. Very few people remain loyal to what does not flatter them publicly. That gives the patient person an enormous edge. I want you to understand something that took many people around me far too long to learn. Wealth is not built by looking wealthy. It is built by quietly acquiring the kinds of strength that make appearances less important. The first time this really became clear to me was when I began noticing how often people with the most visible success were secretly living on a much tighter edge than they admitted. The car was financed heavily. The house was sized to the absolute limit of comfort. The lifestyle had become dependent on every bonus and every raise. The wardrobe looked expensive. The balance sheet looked nervous. At the same time, some of the calmest and most financially resilient people I knew looked fairly ordinary from the outside. They drove modestly. They spent carefully. They did not perform prosperity. But they had reserves. They had investments. They had room. And room is the word I care about. Money should buy room, room to think, room to recover, room to pivot, room to survive, room to wait for the right opportunity instead of lunging for the wrong one because the account balance cannot absorb another delay. Once you understand that, a great many things become easier. You stop asking whether a purchase makes you look like you are moving up. You start asking whether it weakens or strengthens the structure underneath your life. That is a much better question. The second mistake I see constantly is that people refuse to give themselves credit for small financial progress, and because they refuse to give themselves credit, they keep losing the will to continue. This may sound soft. It is not soft at all. It is behavioral engineering. Human beings need evidence. A person can be making the right decisions and still abandon them if every month feels emotionally like failure. That happens. Someone pays off a card instead of acknowledging it. He says he should have done it earlier. Someone builds the first month of emergency savings. Instead of seeing progress, she says it is still nowhere near enough. Someone finally begins investing regularly. Instead of taking pride in the new habit, he compares himself to a person who began 10 years earlier and decides he is hopelessly late. It is also common. You cannot build a long financial life on permanent self-contempt. I have no interest in fake praise, but I have enormous respect for measured acknowledgement. Progress matters. The household that stops overdrafting has done something significant. The young worker who ends a month with money left over for the first time has done something significant. The family that finally knows where its money is going has done something significant. The person who passes on an impulse purchase because the future has started to matter a little more has done something significant. What I have learned is that financial improvement is easier to sustain when the person can feel progress without demanding perfection. Perfection is a fine way to quit. If I were rebuilding a person's relationship with money from the ground up, I would have him keep a record not only of numbers, but of wins. Not big wins only. Behavioral wins. Skip the stupid purchase. Raise the automatic transfer. Went 1 month without carrying the old habit. Opened the account that had been avoided. Canceled the expense that had become invisible. Asked for a better rate. Applied for the role that raised earning power. Those things matter because they change identity. A person who keeps evidence of sensible action begins to see himself differently. He is no longer just somebody trying. He is somebody who is becoming reliable with money. That identity shift is worth a great deal. Now, let me tell you about another trap that keeps people financially behind for years. They think in days, sometimes in weeks, occasionally in months, very rarely in decades. The human mind loves short intervals because short intervals produce emotional drama. Did I save enough this month? Why is the account not bigger already? Why does the market look flat? Why am I still not where I thought I would be by now? Those questions are understandable. They are also a wonderful way to remain discouraged. The compounding world does not reveal itself well on a short horizon. That is true of money, it is true of skill, it is true of reputation, it is true of health, it is true of almost everything worth building. The first stretch looks flat. That is exactly why most people quit too early. The person who starts investing steadily and expects life-changing proof in 12 months is likely to be disappointed. The person who begins learning a valuable skill and expects a transformed income in 6 weeks is likely to be disappointed. The person who lowers expenses and expects immediate feelings of abundance is likely to be disappointed. The pattern is the same in every domain. Early effort feels underpaid. Later effort looks brilliant, only because the person remained loyal through the underpaid stage. If I were teaching someone how to get ahead financially over the next year, I would not ask him only what he wants by December. That is too narrow. I would ask him where he wants to stand 10 years from now, and what daily or weekly behavior, if repeated long enough, would make that future more likely. That question changes the whole tone of a financial life. Now you are no longer trying to impress a calendar. You are building a trajectory. Trajectories matter more than snapshots. A person with modest savings habits and a decade long mindset is usually in far better shape than the person with occasional dramatic bursts of effort and no long horizon at all. The crowd loves drama. I love durability. That is one reason I distrust financial plans built entirely around intense motivation. Motivation is weather. Systems are architecture. That brings me to something far more practical. A surprising number of people do not really know their relationship with money. They know whether they feel stressed. They know whether they feel constrained. They know whether they feel guilty. But they do not know the numbers clearly enough to manage them intelligently. I have never seen confusion produce a good financial outcome for long. A person who does not know what comes in, what goes out, what categories are bloated, what obligations are fixed, and what his actual monthly gap looks like is trying to steer through fog while insisting he will somehow find the road by intuition. Intuition is not good enough for that job. A great many people are not poor because they earn too little. They are poor because they do not have a conscious relationship with cash flow. Their spending is reactive. Their subscriptions multiply invisibly. Their housing was chosen emotionally. Their convenience costs are treated as inevitable. Their little leaks never get examined because each leak feels too small to justify attention. Then at the end of the month they say, money just disappears. Money does not just disappear, it gets assigned. Sometimes intelligently, often lazily. So one of the most powerful changes a person can make is to begin watching money without drama, not obsessively. Just honestly, track what comes in, track what goes out, know the categories, know the patterns, know the fixed costs that lock up flexibility. Know the emotional purchases that show up when you are tired, bored, insecure, or trying to reward yourself for a hard week. Until you know those things, you do not really know your money. You only know your feelings about money. Those are not the same. I want to say something else that may irritate some people. Living below your means is still one of the strongest financial advantages available to ordinary people. It is not trendy. It is not glamorous. It is not especially photogenic. It works. And it works because it creates surplus. Surplus is the beginning of almost every good financial story. No emergency fund without surplus, no investing without surplus, no debt payoff without surplus, no flexibility without surplus, no ability to say no without surplus. If every dollar already has a claimant before it arrives, then your life is being run on a very short leash. That is exhausting. A person with even a modest surplus lives differently. Not necessarily more luxuriously, more calmly. That matters. One of the cleanest sources of calm is an emergency buffer. This is one of the least appreciated distinctions between people who are surviving and people who are beginning to thrive financially. An emergency fund does not excite people because it is not performative. It does not make a dramatic story. It just sits there, quiet, useful. The public likes exciting assets. I like useful ones. The first month of living expenses saved is not a glamorous milestone. It is a deeply important one because once you have that first month, the relationship between inconvenience and catastrophe begins to change. A surprise bill is still unpleasant. It is not automatically a crisis. A period of uncertainty is still stressful. It is not automatically a collapse. You can think, you can choose, you can pause before making a desperate decision. That is a bigger upgrade than many people realize. A person living paycheck to paycheck is not only financially exposed, he is cognitively exposed. Every surprise arrives with urgency attached. Urgency produces bad decisions. Bad decisions produce further weakness. That loop is devastating. A buffer interrupts the loop. That is why I care about it so much. Start with 1 month, then 3, then 6. You do not need to romanticize it, just build it. Each step is not merely more cash, it is more room. And room is exactly what financial strain tries to take from you. I have also found that the emergency fund does something subtler. It changes how a person carries himself in the world. He is less desperate in negotiation, less vulnerable to pressure, less likely to tolerate nonsense because the fear of immediate financial collapse is no longer sitting in the front seat of every decision. There are few upgrades more powerful than that. Now, if you want to make these improvements durable, you cannot depend on memory and good intentions alone. You need automation. One of the best financial habits I know is making the right decision before emotion gets a vote. That is what automation does. When income arrives and a portion moves automatically to savings and investment before you have a chance to reinterpret your desires, your future finally stops living on leftovers. Leftovers never built much. The classic mistake is to spend naturally and promise yourself that whatever remains at the end of the month will be saved. For many people, nothing remains, or almost nothing. Why? Because human beings are masters of absorption. We absorb income into lifestyle very quickly. If the money sits there available, it starts attracting reasons to disappear: the dinner, the device, the trip, the sale, the little comfort, the emotional relief purchase. Then the month ends, and the transfer that was supposed to happen becomes optional. Again, optionality is often the enemy of good habits. I would rather make the future a claimant at the front of the line. Automatic transfer on payday, automatic investment schedule, automatic debt overpayment. If that is the priority, automatic pension or retirement contribution increase when income rises. Those things may sound simple. Good simple is what survives busy lives. You do not need more complexity. You need fewer moments in which your weaker impulses can hijack a sound plan. Automation also reduces one of the costliest habits in personal finance, the impulse bargain. A person sees money in the account and thinks there is room. There is not room. There is unassigned money pretending to be room. Once the system has already moved the future portion where it belongs, the present becomes easier to manage. Honestly, I do not mean easy in a sentimental sense. I mean clearer. The line is drawn. You live within what remains. That is a healthy arrangement. There is another idea people like to misuse, which is multiple income streams. Usually they hear the phrase and immediately think they need 5 different hustles, 12 apps, a complicated business structure, and a personality disorder built around being busy. That is nonsense. The real point of diversified income is not to become chaotic. It is to reduce fragility. If all of your financial life rests on one paycheck, one employer, one role, one sector, or one form of labor, then your cash flow is concentrated. Concentration creates risk. That does not mean everyone needs a dramatic second career. Sometimes the second stream begins very modestly. Investment income, interest income, a small side service tied to a skill you already possess. Freelance work, digital products, advisory work, a seasonal project, a more valuable form of labor than the one you currently rent out by the hour. The purpose is not activity for activity's sake. The purpose is to teach your financial life how to stand on more than one leg. That is extremely valuable. And if you do not yet have a second stream, I would start with the most boring and accessible one available to many people: ownership of productive assets through regular investing. Not because it makes you rich overnight, because it begins the transfer from labor, only dependence to partial capital partnership. That handoff changes lives. The first dollar of income earned by your money instead of by your time is psychologically important. It tells you a new kind of relationship is possible. Then, as skills rise and your understanding improves, you may build other streams sensibly. The key word is sensibly. A second stream that destroys your health, your relationships, and your judgment is not diversification. It is disguised self-sabotage. I want robustness, not chaos. Now, let me speak about another obstacle that quietly destroys financial progress: other people's opinions. I have watched astonishing numbers of people make mediocre financial decisions because they did not want to look strange. They kept the expensive life because a smaller one felt like failure. They delayed investing because friends made it sound boring. They did not start the little business because someone might find it embarrassing. They stayed in bad social spending patterns because saying no required explaining themselves. They bought for approval. They borrowed to preserve image. They hesitated to build because the crowd was more comfortable when everyone consumed. Similarly, this is more common than many people admit. The crowd usually rewards visible sameness and quietly punishes independent allocation. If you are reducing expenses while others are inflating theirs, you will look odd. If you are saving while others are spending, you will look constrained. If you are building the hidden game while others are displaying the visible game, you may look behind right up until you are not. That is why independence matters so much. I ask a very simple question: when I feel the pressure of opinion, how much will this person contribute to the actual shape of my future? The answer is usually not much. And if the answer is not much, then their view of my spending, saving, investing, or timing is worth very little. It is an argument for ownership. It is your life, it is your cash flow, it is your retirement, it is your risk, it is your freedom or lack of it. Do not rent out your judgment cheaply. The final principle, and perhaps the most important of all, is that the best long-term investment for many people is not a stock, a fund, or a property. It is themselves. This point has been made so often that people nod politely and then fail to act on it seriously. I mean it very literally. Your earning power is shaped by your skills. Your adaptability is shaped by your knowledge. Your health affects the quality of your output, your mood, your discipline, your persistence, and your resilience. Your communication ability changes what opportunities find you. Your reputation changes what problems people trust you to solve. These things compound too, and unlike market prices, they are not repriced every afternoon by strangers. That makes them unusually valuable. If you become more useful, more capable, more trustworthy, more articulate, more specialized, or more effective, your economic life tends to improve in multiple directions. You may earn more, you may save more, you may invest more, you may identify opportunities other people cannot see. You may avoid traps other people fall into. A person who keeps investing in himself compounds in both capital and capability. That is a magnificent combination. I do not mean self-investment in the vanity sense. I mean real self-investment. Learning, reading, studying, practicing, improving health, building focus, developing a rare or at least valuable competence, becoming the kind of person who creates more value than before. That effort never looks dramatic in the beginning. Good. The best compounding rarely does. Now, if I take all of this together, the path becomes very plain. Stop letting status decide what success means. Start measuring the hidden game. Acknowledge progress. So your mind begins to cooperate with your future instead of constantly attacking it. Think in decades so you do not abandon a sound path because one season looks slow. Know your numbers and live below your means so surplus can exist. Build an emergency buffer so one surprise does not become a disaster. Automate the good decisions so the future is paid first. Develop additional income streams with sanity, not frenzy. Care much less about opinions from people who will not carry the consequences of your choices. Invest in yourself so your earning power and judgment keep improving. Notice what these principles have in common. None of them require drama. None of them require a miracle. None of them require being born into unusual circumstances. They do require honesty. They require patience. They require repetition. They require enough maturity to prefer freedom over display. That is the whole game in many respects. I have never met a financially strong person whose life was built only from one brilliant act. I have met many financially strong people whose lives were built from dozens of small, sensible acts performed so consistently that the results eventually look dramatic to outsiders. That is how real improvement usually happens quietly. Then, unmistakably, so if someone asked me how to get ahead over the next 12 months without pretending the world will change overnight, I would say this. Choose the right scoreboard, record the wins, stretch the horizon, know the numbers, protect the downside, automate the upside, reduce fragility, stop performing for the crowd, and keep becoming more valuable. Do that for 1 year and your direction improves. Do it for 3 and your identity changes. Do it for 10 and the life you once thought belonged to other people starts looking much more possible. Not because you got lucky, because you finally started playing the right game long enough for the math to matter.